there, how are you? I'm Christine, and I've got a watercolor project that's perfect for practicing getting your paint to mix and mingle on your paper. Once it's dry, I'm going to show you how I add all kinds of fun details using pens, brush markers, colored pencils, and more. If you're working along with me, we're just going to draw our name in bubble letters like we probably all did when we were kids. Keeping that part very simple and easy so that we can focus on the painting and detailing. Ready to give it a try? Here we go. This piece is completely done with watercolor, no markers or brushes at all. And I went back after the initial painting was dry to pick out more details and add background stuff using only brushes and more watercolor. Here's how to get that first wash or layer down using a wet into really wet approach. My first step is to pick up a clean brush and put it in clean water and paint the first letter of my name. I'm painting a letter C. The next thing is to get some paint on my brush and touch that into the wet paper, the wet area on my paper. And you can see that color is starting to spread right away. If you lose your place when you're doing this because you can't see where you put the water, just tilt your page a tiny bit and look for the sheen, and that'll tell you where the paper's wet. Now I'm going to pick up the paper and tilt it back and forth so you can see the different colors of paint running together even more. You just tilt it around and kind of watch the paint move until it gets where you want it to go, and you can shake it a little. I'm actually going to give this a big whack on the table just for fun and make some of that extra paint and water run outside the lines, and I can create something interesting out of that later on. By the way, wet into wet is a watercolor painting technique. That means the paper's wet and the brush is wet or full of really wet paint, and it allows the colors to run and blend together. Now I'm just putting in my next letter using clear water again. I'm going to use one brush for the clean water to paint each letter and a second brush for putting in the color. Also, I touched my wet brush into the letter C while it was still wet, so it created a bridge there, and some of that blue paint ran over into my letter H. That's not really what I wanted to do, but it's not going to hurt anything on this. But keep that in mind when you're working. If you let your paintbrush touch an area that is still wet, it does create that bridge, and your paints will run together like that. So let's tilt this around some more, get those colors to blend and run around and do neat things. I like whacking it on the table. I just like the look of that. You can control how much blending and running together you get by using more water or less, and wetter or drier paint too. And you want to be thinking about your color choices. You don't want to put complementary colors together in a wet area. That's colors that are opposite of each other on the color wheel, because when those colors blend or mix, they make a neutral, like a gray-brown, and you probably don't want that happening here. So keep that in mind. Be a little bit careful what colors you choose to put together. And I've got a whole lot of water going on here, so that's really going to run together a lot. You also can blow on your paint in order to have a little bit more control of the direction where your excess runs, and I like to do that. I'm going to give it a whack too, just to see what happens. Oh yeah, I like that. That's pretty. Okay. Now I'm going to paint this letter I, and I'm going to paint a big dot up there. Make that really pretty big. And I've kind of got a lot of water on there. I'm going to show you how when you put a whole lot of water and a whole lot of wet paint, then you might get something with, when it dries, it's going to have hard edges, and you'll see what I'm talking about a little later on in the painting. I'll point that out to you. And I don't know that I want that up there. So I'm probably going to break that up by shaking it or spraying it or something. Then let's see, put some blue in here. That'll be pretty. I do have a lot of water though, so that is really going to run a whole lot. You need to practice with this so that you can get to a point where you know just how much water to add and how thick or how diluted to make your paint and how much you move your paper around, because that will affect whether you get the results that you're liking or not. And as you can see, I've got a lot of water in both of these. I'm going to move that big puddle of water at the top of my letter I by blowing on it, because if I leave it there, it's going to just dry too dark, and this will be pretty. There, isn't that pretty? Made a nice green color because of mixing those two, that particular yellow and blue. They look good. Now, as I was saying, you got to be a little bit careful, or you got to just learn how to know how to put enough water, but not too much, and enough paint that's wet but not too wet, so that you can get more control over how much your paints move around freely within that area that you put the water on, the part of your paper that you wetted. So I'm not putting quite as much water on here. I'm working on getting just the shapes that I think will look nice. And I'm going to drop some blue in here, a little bit darker blue near the bottom, a little bit lighter blue up at the top. And this paint is not quite as watery as the paint. For example, the paint I used on the letter C was really diluted, so it's light. The paint that I used in the letter R was it was a darker paint, but it went into a really wet area on the paper. Now this one is not so wet, and the paint is not so wet, so you can see the paint is more inclined to just lay there where I put it, but it's still wet, and I'm painting wet into wet, so it is going to have that soft transition from one color into the next. The dark into the light will get a nice blended transition that'll be smooth if I shake it a little bit like this. But you can see the shaking and the knocking it on the table, it isn't doing as much stuff to this one as it did to some of the other ones that had a whole ton of excess water. And that's the thing that I want you to practice by doing this, so you can see, and like I said, just get a feel for how to get the right amount of water and the right amount of wetness into your paint, so that you can get the results that you want on purpose each time after you've practiced and learned how to do that. Now that looks pretty cool. I like it. I'm going to spray it though with this water bottle and put a little mist on it so you can see what that does. It's just one more way to introduce a little bit of water into it and get this paint to move around a little bit more. Now I want to show you, you can actually spray water onto an area that's mostly dried already, and it'll kind of lift some of that pigment up and float it over, and you can get some pretty designs going on, or pretty effects going on there. Let's put some of this down on the bottom here and get this green to run around on the bottom. Look how nice that looks. Now the letter C is boring, so I'm going to spray some water on that and see if I can shift some of that pigment around. And it did a little, but I didn't actually put a whole lot of pigment on that letter C to begin with, and then I knocked most of it out the top. So I'm going to go ahead and add in some purple paint again to that big puddle, and I sprayed it heavily, so I got a lot of water running around again. and I'm going to touch some of this pretty turquoise color into some of those wet areas and just watch what that does. I like the color, so I'm going to just add little bits of it here and there around on my piece just to see what that will look like later. Now as this dries, it's going to really change a whole lot. That is part of the nature of watercolor. It will get lighter, and as long as it's wet, the pigment will keep traveling across the wet area of the paper and finding other stuff to blend with. And so make sure you don't overdo spraying it with water and shaking it. You can end up with one big grayish blob because everything all blended together too much if you put too much water. So maybe practice that a time or two also so that you'll know what not to do. But keep in mind too that it's going to dry lighter than it looks when it's wet, and the paint will keep shifting around. I'm just adding a little paint there to extend the top of my letter I up a little better because I think it needs it. And we're just about to the letting it dry stage. And you will have to just step away and give it some time to dry. Here it is all dry. Now remember, I could finish it off with watercolors and brushes, and then it would look like this one. This was all the stuff that I added, like that daisy on the top of the letter I. I just added that in with brushes after the first wash was dry. But today I'm going to create with just about everything in my arsenal, or almost everything, and it's dry and it's ready to start detailing. So let me show you what kind of pens and markers and stuff I have that I'm going to basically find and draw out the story that's right now lying dormant in the paint and in those letters. So these are brush markers. They have a brush tip, so you can make all kinds of really fine marks, or with a little more pressure get a wider mark with those markers. These Tombos are dual brush pens. They are water-based and blendable, and the dual brush means it has a brush tip on one end, and you can see it has a regular, like a pen style tip on the other end. They come in all kinds of colors, and they come with a blending pen that's the same brush tip on one end and pen on the other, and I use the heck out of these things. I love them. They're one of my favorite tools to use because they're very versatile. You can do a ton with it. I've almost used all the life out of this one. It's my second one, and I've really used it heavily. Now I've got colored pencils. I've got a bunch of different colored Sharpies. These are ultra fine point in different colors. I've got my micron drawing, and I think some people call them technical pens. Those come in all different sizes of the pen tip. I use a mechanical pencil a lot. I got permanent markers of every kind. These are a couple more brush tip markers, and I've got a sepia one, and this one is sanguine. I thought sanguine was a temperament, but I guess it's a color too. I have got other pencils, and I've got these blending stumps. They're really good for blending colored pencil and a regular pencil. These are jelly roll pens, and I've got a blue one and a whole bunch of white ones. The white ones I use all the time. They're the ones I use the most. And then I've got some pattern books. I got them originally at my local library, and I liked them really well, so I went out and bought my own copies. But what I do is sometimes if I'm stuck for an idea, I just page through these books. I use them making like Christmas ornaments and cards and all kind of things. But again, I may be stuck for an idea, and so I flip through here, and something I see may spark an idea, or may use something that's directly off one of these pages. You can also find pattern all around your house, like in the fabric of your curtains or out in the yard, in your garden. There's pattern everywhere. I've also got this extra cup of miscellaneous pens, and I wanted to tell you to feel free to use whatever you have when you're doing this. Anything and everything goes, because we're working mixed media now. So whatever you have, you may have ballpoint pens and highlighters in your desk. That's fine. Use whatever you have and whatever you want to use to embellish and add detail onto what you've got started with your watercolor paint. Now, my paper is, I went ahead and taped it down onto this piece of cardboard. Mainly, it got warped. The paper itself got warped from all the water I put all over it during the painting process. But, and that's no big deal, except for that it's just easier to work on when you take this something sturdy and tape it flat to it. It's easier to work on. Now, I want to talk to you about staining versus sedimentary pigment paints. When you use sedimentary pigment paint, and I'm using cold press paper, which is not a flat surface like hot press, it's got like nooks and crannies and little low spots. And the pigment from those sedimentary paints will kind of settle down in those low spots and make really neat textures and pretty things happen on your paper. So look for those things too, and don't try to cover that all up, because that's pretty and you want to keep some of that. Now let's get right into making marks. I'm going to take this light blue highlighter, and I'm not sure if this is a star or a flower. I don't really know yet. I don't actually have a plan when I'm doing this. I'm just playing and creating, and here's where it gets really fun, and it's kind of like doodling. I'm blending that marker too with a blending stick, blending pen, and then I clean off the tip of it just to try and help extend the life of it. I'm not sure if it does, but it seems to. So, and look right here. This just happened in the paint, and it looks so much like a star that I'm just going to enhance that with my markers and pick out that shape there. Whoops, too dark. But I can pick that right back up with my blending pen. But anyway, that just happened in the paint. I didn't plan that. And as I'm looking at it and working, there is a star. So I made that more obvious. Now I'm using these gel pens. I wanted to point out to you that a lot of times the ink, when it comes out of here, it's almost it's so transparent you almost can't see it. But as it dries, it brightens up and gets more distinct and more bright white. I would say it darkens, but it's white. So, but they're really fun to work with. You just have to remember kind of where you drew, because you may not be able to see it real good while you're drawing it. But as it dries, it pops out and becomes more visible, and you can get some really fun effects with these gel pens, because you can write this. I use it a lot to put white over top of the darker watercolor paint, because you can't really paint white real good over dark in watercolor. So like I said, I'm just going to be going around here, finding little things that I see and picking them out more, making them a little bit more obvious with my markers and pens and pencils. And right here, this is one of those water blooms or cauliflowers, where I had a whole bunch of water, and all the pigment, as the puddle dries, all the pigment goes out to the outer edges of that puddle, and you get a hard edge. And some people call it a bloom, some people call it a cauliflower. But to me, it looks like a carnation, so I'm going to turn it into a carnation. And that's one of the fun things that you can do when you're doing this kind of a project. You get to just play and be creative. And it's really like finding shapes in the clouds. And I think it's fun, so I do this a lot. I find it relaxing too. And I guess the reason for that is because there's really no pressure on. I'm just having fun. there, that's looking more and more like a carnation when it was just a cauliflower or a bloom in my paper. And again, you want to learn how to do this on purpose so that you know how not to make it happen when you're painting something like, say, you're painting a big sky and you don't want one of those right in the middle of your sky. Unless you're doing really stormy clouds, that might be a time when you would want that. That pencil didn't do very much. Let me try this pen. And that looks better. Now I'm going to jump around on this paper too, working on first one part and then another, just because it kind of keeps it fresh. And I'm going to keep changing what pen or pencil or marker I'm using. Again, that just kind of keeps it fresh, keeps everything happening in a way that's not boring. And it lends itself good to keeping a more consistent thing all over the whole page. Now sometimes you just have to stop and look at your piece and think about it. That's part of the process. Like I said, I don't have a plan. I'm just making this up as I go, like doodling. And it can almost be art therapy. It's fun. And who's going to tell you you did it wrong? So, blending, coloring, blending, drawing, stopping to look and think, what should I do next? What do I see next in the paint? It's just a process that you work with, and you can take as long as you want to do this. You can put in as much detail as you want or as little. You're completely in control of this part of the project. So, you know, the fact that the watercolor is out of control and goes crazy all over your paper, that's okay, because now you start imposing some sort of a design or a plan or a story. I think the more I draw on this, the more the identity or the story of the piece starts to appear to me. And that's why I said I stop and look at it and think sometimes. I tell people that my paintings speak to me. It's just kind of like I'm looking for what else I see that's partly there and partly hidden, and I just use my imagination and my markers and pens to kind of bring out a story. And the fact that I don't know the whole story when I start is no big deal. It's kind of evolving and being created as I work. The story's coming out. So I don't put any pressure on myself for that. I just keep grabbing another pen and putting the marks on as I find them, as I see something that I think, oh, this could be a bark, or this could be leaves, or this might be a flower. And if I get a mark on there that I don't quite like, I can usually blend it back out with that blending pen, or I can go over it with I could even, if I put something on here I really hate it, I could go over it with some acrylic paint. So there's really no fear to this. Just start drawing and see what happens. I'm just going to keep on throwing stuff in here and blending stuff out, and I've got some spots there I didn't like, so I just blended those right out with my blending pen. I may put something else in there later, I don't know.
kind of think I would like that to extend a little further down. So I just take a pen and put some ink on there, and then use my blending pen to just make it look like it's an extension of that side of the letter H. Now I'm going to use my metallic blue jelly roll. This ink will dry shiny, well, you know, metallic blue. So I'm just going to put a few things right in here. That looks like that would be fun. And these you can buy at any art supply store. Just a jelly roll pen, easy to use, and not too expensive. Now this, I think I would like this bigger. I really like this color. Let's spread that out a little bit and kind of fill that area back there with a little bit more of that color. To me, it almost looks like that's something that kind of exploded out or flew out of the letter R, because it's a similar color. So again, I don't really know what this is going to be, what's going on, but I'm just looking at little pieces of the puzzle. That's really what it's like. It's a lot like working a puzzle. And so just kind of focusing right on this little area right now, and not really looking at the whole big painting so much as looking at little areas. But because I'm jumping around, I'm kind of staying in the same mindset, and so I do get something that looks good as a whole. Now I'm going to continue all that mark making for a while, but I'm going to turn off the camera because it can be boring. This is, I'm back, and this is how far I got. I apologize for the lighting being bad. I worked until it was evening and I lost the daylight, so now the piece is up under the lamp and it just doesn't look quite right in this lighting, but I'll bring it back in the daylight tomorrow. Here we are, and I'm going to go again, just picking up the markers and making marks. And this looked like a little flower right there, so I'm going to add more stuff to turn it into a flower. And tried to use that white colored pencil over there. It made a little bit of mark, but not really strong, but it's still pretty. And this needs like to grow some more flowers right below that flower there. So that's what I'm doing. I still don't have a real major plan for this, but I'm far enough into the project now that I kind of see the direction the overall piece is taking, and that means a couple of different things. The biggest thing is that it means that I kind of have to stop and step back and look at it. So there's a lot more of that going on, and that was one reason I didn't film the whole thing for you, because it would be boring to watch someone think. But you get the gist of what I'm doing, that you can see easily at this point. Now this jelly roll pen is actually called a souffle pen. I think you can see that on there, souffle. I buy these at my local art supply store and I use them a lot. But I want to show you again how that when you're using them, let's get the ink flowing here. When you're using them, they don't, you can't see the mark you made real easily at first. Zoom in so you can actually see what I'm talking about. Here we go. I'm going to draw a little tiny dragonfly right in here. Just a little white, tiny little creature. And as I'm drawing it, I have to remember where I drew, because it's not real obvious when I'm drawing. Here you can see it a little better than sometimes because I got the ink flowing good before I started drawing. But you see, it's almost not even there until it dries. But it makes a nice effect, and I like to add this into my work, so I thought I would show you how to use these pens. If you draw blind contour drawings very much, then you know how that will help you when you're working with these jelly roll pens, because you have to remember where you already put a line. And see, you can't really see that very good right now, but as it dries, it becomes much more visible. Sometimes I blow on it a little bit to get it to dry faster, but you don't have to do that. But even this quickly, you can see like the antenna on the little butterfly that I drew. The antenna is really appearing even as we watch it. So that's a thing where you just kind of have to go do something else and come back in a minute after it's dry, and you can see what you've got there. And if you need, you can touch it up and add more at that point. So I'm going to leave the camera focused right there so you can see what's going to happen there and see it, how it looks once it's dry. And I'll go ahead and draw some more details in right here. So you don't have to just sit there and watch paint dry. And I don't know what these are. They're just some kind of curly, swirly somethings. But I could see them in the paint, and so I'm using my pen to make them more visible. Now here's the jelly roll pen, Dragonfly and Butterfly, showing up a little bit brighter. Now I'm going to put a few more marks in here, bring a few more things out, put some dark color beside that white so that the white shows up more. Use my blending pen to just kind of rub some things around. You can also use that blending pen when you smudge things out in one area. You can use the ink that has picked up, transfer it over to another area, and use it almost like a color. Right here, I'm drawing something in that wasn't there at all. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can sort of see something that's partly there in the paint and bring it out and enhance it, or draw something completely that wasn't there. But stop and look at your piece every once in a while and think about it and get your ideas of what next needs to go in there. And when I was drawing this, I was liking that little piece that came off the bottom of the letter H, and so I didn't want to get rid of it, but I realize now it almost makes that look like letter A instead of an H. But I'll probably leave it anyway. It's turning into, well, what I see is something like maybe a little fairy house or something out of that letter H. So that one little extra piece across there is either the gate or part of the floor or the table inside there. I don't really know, but I like it, so I'm going to leave it there. Now I'm going to make some stone steps going up inside there, because to me that's what I could see when I looked at it. So I'm putting it in there. But that's one of the fun things about this too. It's your piece, your world that you're drawing and creating, and you get to put in it whatever you want to have in it. So that's another fun reason to do these projects. So here it is, just about finished, and here it is finished. And I just decided it was finished. I can't really tell you anything other than that. I just decided, hey, it's finished now. So now I'm going to take this tape off here and show you how even a fun little doodling art project like this can actually turn into a piece of nice artwork when you just put a mat and maybe put a mat on it and put it in a frame, and you might surprise yourself at how your creative doodle time turns into some pretty original, nice artwork. So let me just get a mat and put that on here, so you can see how that might look. Pretty nice. I like it. hope you enjoyed drawing and painting with me today. If you did, can you please click the like button to let me know? And also click on that subscribe button so you can know when I've posted something new to try. I put links to my website and social media on the comments section below, and you can leave me a comment. You can check out my website. And thanks for watching.